All right, welcome everyone. Today's April 30th. This is the SIG Instrumentation meeting, and we have a couple of topics today. I think the first one is from Mark.
I think it's just on, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just an FYI that I just updated it today because there was later changes, but the release cycle was pushed, so the enhancement freeze is pushed 2 weeks to May 19th, and the code freeze is pushed also 2 weeks to June 25. And yeah, that's just FYI for people to write KEPs that they have additional 2 weeks to work on them. Yeah, that's all.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Seems very useful because we have 3 new KEPs in discussion today. And the first one we have is by Jordan. Go ahead.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, cool. I was gonna do a quick demo of this if you want to let me share my screen. I can show rather than tell.
Go ahead.
It says I can't share my screen.
Yeah, I think that's limited to hosts.
I just make them a co-host. That's what we do in SIG-Node.
Oh, I guess I can make you a co-host. You're like a legit person.
Oh,
I've heard of them before.
Oh no, I can't actually do it. Frederick, you've got to do it.
All right. All right, can you see my terminal?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, although it'd be great if you made the font bigger.
I can do that. Is that better?
Yes.
A little bit, some, a little bit. All right, so this KEP has a few aspects. The motivation is that Kubernetes has a lot of things going on, and one of those things is APIs graduate from beta to GA, and we deprecate and remove the pre-release versions over a fairly long period of time, like multiple releases, sometimes a year. Those deprecations are announced in release notes and in API docs and sometimes blog posts, but there's no great way for users or admins to have visibility to the fact that they're actually using these deprecated APIs. And so if you didn't scrupulously read every release notes document and keep track of the timelines and everything, when the APIs actually go away, we're often surprised. So this KEP is proposing a way to surface use to users and a way to give admins visibility to deprecated API use in their clusters. So this is a demo of what it could look like in practice. So I have a manifest that has some beta APIs that were actually deprecated a couple of releases ago, which you may or may not have known. And if I send those to the server would have information that those are deprecated and would spit back warning headers, which client Go and kube control would gather and then handle in whatever way they wanted to. So I have kube control set up to output those to standard error as warnings, which we already output client-side warnings to standard error under some circumstances. So this hooks in at the client level, which means that no matter what operations I do when I talk to that endpoint, if I get a warning header back, that header gets processed. It even works for like raw requests where we point kube control directly at an endpoint and don't do any other sort of client-side processing. The client still sees that warning. So from a user perspective, this is great. Like if I am using these deprecated things, I get told frequently, like, this is deprecated, this is when it was deprecated, this is when it's going away, this is what you should use instead. So that's the first half of the proposal. The part that's perhaps more interesting to SIG Instrumentation is from a cluster admin perspective. Say we were running version 121, and I wanted to know if it was safe to upgrade this cluster to 122, where this deprecated API is going to go away. What I would really like to do is be able to query a metric that says, show me use of deprecated things that are removed in 122. And so in addition to returning a warning header to the user, we can increment a count of a deprecated API use. And one of the dimensions we can add to that is the version, major minor version, where the deprecated API is being removed. So this removes the burden from cluster admins to also read release notes and sort of keep track of timelines and everything to know when an API is being removed, and lets them put as part of their upgrade pre-check, you know, if I'm about to upgrade to 122, query to see if APIs that are removed in that version were used over some period of time, you know, the last day, last week, last month, whatever they want to gate on. And then if there is usage, the third part that the KEP proposes is adding an annotation to audit events. So if you see usage of these deprecated things, you could then go query your audit logs to track down like which specific client or namespace or whatever you need to go fix. And then reset the metric or watch for the metric no longer growing over time. Once you have a period of time with no use of deprecated APIs that are removed in the next version, then you are safe to upgrade. That's my demo. That's my spiel. Yeah, one of the things I was talking with Han about, I know we had cardinality issues with some of the other metrics around requests with lots of dimensions, and so we tried to cut this down to just version resource, removed major minor version and verb. So we dropped some of the really problematic things like the component and the content type and the dry run. Like we tried to drop out all of the things that wouldn't actually make sense and would blow up our cardinality. But yeah, so if there are questions, I'm happy to take those, or if you want to go look at the KEP, it got merged to implementable, but the implementation hasn't started yet. So if there's additional feedback that people had, I'm glad to hear it.
One thing, I know that we also talked about this, but looking at it now, I do feel like the version thing would maybe be better if it was just one label with the dot syntax.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I thought there were maybe some benefits to representing them as integers, but I don't feel strongly. I'm happy to defer to whatever SIG Instrumentation thinks works best.
Were you commenting on them being separate labels, or what were you talking about?
Yeah.
Remove major minor distinct labels.
I don't really have a strong opinion on that.
I think it reads better, and also it's more consistent with the way that we've been expressing versions in Kubernetes. I mean, we just passed around that version string and we use some Ver library to parse the thing. But on the server side, for metrics and Jasper, you can actually just make separated virtually into two labels if you really want that.
Okay.
You can
So one thing that I'm kind of wondering is, what, like we already capture like requests in the normal API server request counters, right? I'm kind of, I feel like I'm missing why those weren't sufficient to do this.
The issue is if you use those, then you have to it's on the admin basically to go figure out which APIs they should be looking at for a given release. And so that's the thing that we've historically had a lot of trouble with. Like, didn't you read the release notes 9 months ago? It was on page 17 that we said this random thing was going to be removed in this random release. And sometimes those targets even change, right? Like what we said in the release notes 9 months ago, 6 months later, we discover an issue that bumps it out 3 months. And so the goal of this is to let them hit a metric. Like, we know when these things are going away. We shouldn't make them go through like 3 steps of indirection. Yeah, that was the goal.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I actually like that a lot. We actually happen to have written alerts for these kinds of things ourselves for the things that we knew, but it would certainly, I can totally see how this makes it easier.
It's a little bit more of a generic approach. I really liked it. Thanks for the demo.
Another option, Jordan, is we could consider adding a new label to the count metric and just make that be degraded or deprecated, which is that doesn't actually increase cardinality at all.
That won't tell you whether the thing is about to be removed. So you actually need 2 labels, I think. Like whether it's deprecated or not, and the target version, and that metric is already so monstrous. I'm really nervous about adding more.
Yeah. So basically, we want to move in the opposite direction, which is we really want to have a core metric for this request stuff without so many dimensions, because right now it's like kind of a dumping ground.
You wouldn't add any dimensions. That's what I'm getting at. Like, if a metric is deprecated, the particular series is a combination of endpoints, it is either deprecated or not in a given release. It won't have more series. The number of series doesn't change, just more labels, but you're already going to get more labels there. So we can take it to an offline thing. I just like to the fundamental point about you're reporting 2 bits of data that are the same data in 2 different series. You can report all of that data in the existing series because that series for a given version of code is either deprecated or not. There's other things to it, like it makes that metric more complex, which is itself an argument. But like, would we come up with other, like the resource tracking one actually had some implications of this, is like, or the scheduling one. So it's just like, that's a good thing to get a policy on for Cube is adding more constant labels to things a good or bad idea when it's about communicating to the infrastructure, to the instrumenter?
Yeah, I think I see the point. Like, I think actually it would almost have the opposite effect of by introducing these metrics, right? We would be adding more metrics, more series, whereas what Clayton was saying is that we could actually expose the same information with the same amount of series.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a constant label. Yeah, basically. Yeah.
So every group version resource tuple, the removed version and the deprecated labels would only have a single value, like for a given server anyway.
It would complicate upgrades a little bit, but upgrade metrics are you already have to take that into account for failover anyway, because you're gonna get multiple series for the different servers and the different versions, and so aggregate queries already have to take that into account. It's more of a do we decorate? Is there actually more of a use case in other places for us adding more constant labels to series that convey operational information that we previously did not consider adding, like aggregate APIs? And I'm not advocating for this at all, but like as a theory, the aggregator proxy, we track all of those API request calls as they pass through the API server. when those are to groups that are hosted on an aggregated API, is it potentially valuable for us to track which backend aggregated API those are going to? I'm not advocating for that. It's just like, that's the same kind of info, like what version is the server behind it? Some of these things we typically force people to join. There might be places where combining them actually has value.
We do that on the request metrics. We have the component thing. It has aggregator and kube API server, the name of the aggregated API server.
No, I mean like even like not just the name, but stuff like the version of the aggregated server. Because, and we don't, aggregates aren't the most important thing.
So additional metadata about the aggregated API server. Interesting.
So concretely, do people feel like a dedicated metric, similar to what I showed, maybe combining major minor into a single label, is better, or adding deprecated and removed version labels to the existing count?
So the problem with adding it to this metric is, okay, you're not gonna reduce the cardinality, but you're going to break certain ingestion pipelines, because this is basically an SLO metric.
In what way does adding a dimension or adding a label break anything? First of all, it's an alpha metric. Like
it's an alpha
we don't
metric.
have any.
Yeah, but this is the special alpha metric that everyone uses for SLO. So it is. Yes, this is the counterintuitive aspect of it. Like you have to think of it like it's the database table. If you create a database entry with a field that doesn't exist, then basically that's going to error out, right? So if you define this additional dimension and that dimension doesn't exist in your backend, depending on your backend, some backends are more resilient to it, others are not. And
yeah, I get your point, but at the end of the day, like we have a Prometheus integration, right? And like I'm not sure. Like I think we can talk about this, but like we're never going to be able to satisfy every use case with this, right?
That's true. But if we're going to have this on the request counter metric, I would prefer that we create a good one, like a really good one without all of the stuff that's in it right now, and then we just do it properly.
Haven't we already done that twice? So this is the first time?
No, the second time was basically almost exactly the same as the first time. It just
actually, I think this metric we've never cleaned up.
Which one? API server request count? We've cleaned it up like 4 times. It just predated SIG instrumentation, or predated the early instrumentation. Like this one we've revved on a bunch, like both cardinality explosions, and we've changed labels. But I mean, we have a process now for having stable metrics APIs, so we should practice those.
Yeah. The client, we can dump the client, I don't know, the client stuff and content type, and just at least bind them to something. But yeah, anyway.
Just keeping an eye on time.
I was gonna say time box it. Like, who should I follow up with to settle whether I should target a new metric or updating the current metric? Would that be like Han and Frederick?
Yeah, I think that would work for me.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. There's 2 more KEPs on the agenda, but from what I can see, they don't exist in the enhancements repo. So I'm assuming that there's no links yet. They're just ideas. Is that correct?
So the next one, maybe Clayton can talk about it more, but there's a Google Doc that was sent to the mailing list.
This is the draft, just to get consensus. So just a real high level, I had spent some time asking a bunch of fundamental questions like, can I actually figure out what's scheduled on a cluster, what the capacity usage is? We've added node allocatable, which allows us to understand what the capacity of the cluster is. And we have a few metrics in kube state metrics that show parts of the life cycle. I actually had come in from the perspective of reviewing how SIGs were properly reflecting that, found a couple bugs along the way, and it got to the point of saying, you know, this is actually a hard problem with the metrics we have today. What can we improve? The proposal is kind of a unified, is attempting to look at it from the holistic perspective of there's a set of standard questions that most admins would want to ask about capacity planning, capacity usage, and available capacity over the lifetime of their cluster. It's a little specific to the mindset that someone's got an monitoring solution is using it with a cluster, which I think is a fair assumption. And it's effectively proposing trying to, we've kind of gone at piecemeal, looking at it from the proposing at least a metric. We have a metric for the node capacity side for a various set of resources, and proposing the equivalent for the pod side in a way that captures the complexity of the model. Frederick had done an investigation of whether we could add more metrics to cube state metrics that would allow us to build up the metrics individually. One of the challenges is you end up with a lot more series because you need to bring in a lot more data to get the fully accurate view. And you end up with maybe 5 or 6 times as many series if you bring all of the smaller pieces in. And so the proposal was one or a set of metrics, depending on the correct pattern, for reporting what the current observed scheduling request is across the cluster on a number of dimensions, starting at pod, namespace, and node, because those are the ones that most people plan around. And then resource as this other dimension. There's a bunch of smaller issues, prototyped it. Basically, I think at the point that if there's no disagreement, this would be something that I would want to propose as a KEP and convert it from the Google Doc, but I wanted to get feedback from this group. And I've had some feedback from users that I've tried to capture in the thing, but not like quotes. And from some of the other SIGs that were not in the form of like, we're going to go endorse this publicly. It was just like, hey, like we really like this too. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help. So people were interested, but I think the feedback phase of using the metrics would be something that will go into the KEP as in the proposal form. How do we get people to try these and use it and offer feedback about whether this actually helps them understand capacity planning and allocation?
Is there any reason? So, I mean, like, so it sounds like to me, you basically want good pod level metrics.
This is about capacity, so it's about requests and limits. Correct. Requests and limits.
Yeah, I'm just looking over both the linked cube state metrics issue and the draft proposal really quickly. This jives with some of the tensions that I found building up this sort of stuff, but I haven't looked at this since like cube 1.8, so.
And I got into it from the init container side because what we're reporting for init containers would be wrong on some clusters. And that requires, you know, a new metric we would have to go add. And then I started asking, well, then we have pod pending overhead coming, and that also is incorrect, or that would have to be factored in. And that's a new set of metrics. And then we have resource usage is going to change when we add pod capacity updates, allowing pods to change their resource requests live. And so I felt like this was a good opportunity to say, can we bring this all together in a way that hides those details from an admin? They see the right metrics even as we add features.
Is the crux of the proposal about having pod level requests and limits, or are some of the other details also critical to being able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish?
The pod is the unit that is scheduled. And so at the heart of the queue, it is also what is evicted. At the heart of the cube system, it's the pod. We could go deeper into containers. I didn't, I simply looked at it from a cardinality perspective, which is, you know, for every new series we add to cube state metrics, that's an O pods or sometimes O, you know, 4X pods or whatever. This could be an O pods that for most people, most of the time, most admins would allow you to get pod namespace and node level constraints, which is 80% of the questions people are going to ask, and would leave the door open for future subdivision if we needed to.
I think part of what I actually quite like about this compared to the investigation that I did about using the kube state metrics or potentially adding more kube state metrics to do these calculations is actually as it changes within the scheduler, this can be reflected in those calculations. And so we don't actually need to keep up with also writing fairly complex PromQL queries, or actually, even if you have a separate system that's not Prometheus, it would not even work with those, right? So people would keep updating all these rules and try to catch up. And it's almost kind of a parallel to what Jordan was saying about, like, we need to, it's kind of our responsibility to tell that up front as opposed to the user having to find out.
Yeah, except these fall into the category of the types of metrics that we're basically going to have to manually garbage collect.
Keeping an eye on time, we have one more KEP on the agenda, and Pavel has been waiting very patiently. So perhaps let's table this discussion just so he can, I haven't seen any links or any proposed KEPs, so maybe can you speak about that super briefly with the 3 minutes that we have left, and we can come back to this discussion. Clayton, it might be good to like actually submit that as the Google Doc as a draft KEP, so more folks can see and comment on it. Does that sound good to everyone?
Personally, super interesting. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Pavel, what do you got?
Yeah. So just to, I wanted to join the meeting just to give you a heads up when it comes to the KEP we are drafting. Me together with the security team, and the problem which we want to address is the problem of some incidents when we had sensitive data like tokens, keys, or passwords leaking into logs of controller manager or some other control plane component. So this was pointed out as one of the high priority things to be fixed in Kubernetes security audit, which was done like a year ago or so. We would like to add an optional mechanism for logging in those components to check if any of the parameters passed to Klog does not contain any sensitive data, like, for instance, password or security key. To allow identification of those parameters, we want to allow tagging fields in structs with a special Golang tag, which later on could be picked up by the verification library, which would be integrated with Klog. So this is like the high-level overview of this KEP. I hope that next week I will be able to publish a draft. Yeah.
Sounds great to me.
Awesome. And I think we're at time, so perhaps we'll take a look once that draft is up at next week's meeting, or well, next meeting in 2 weeks.
Should we have another meeting next week because the KEP deadline is coming up and we have many KEPs? Would people want that? We don't
I have no objections to that, although we haven't done that before. Frederick, do you have any thoughts?
What is exactly the deadline again? Is it May 19th?
It's in 2 weeks, right?
So we would definitely have another meeting anyways.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. It's probably fine.
Yeah. it seems like we've reviewed at least the potential KEPs, and everything else can be done offline, I feel.
No, there's one more actually.
We are out of time though, so can you make sure to put it on the mailing list then?
It's not mine.
Ah, okay. But in any case, we are out of time, so please make sure to let everyone know what you're talking about, and see you all at the next meeting, and have a wonderful local time. Bye-bye.
Everyone. Thanks.